Bienvenidas y bienvenidos a nuestro quinto diálogo de la serie Mujeres Transformando un Mundo en Crisis. Para nosotras es un gusto tenerlas aquí. Queremos iniciar este diálogo diciéndoles buenos días, buenas tardes, pero también hablando un poco sobre la interpretación. Así que voy a dejar el micrófono abierto a nuestra compañera Paulina, quien estará dándonos algunas indicaciones sobre la interpretación.
Good morning, everyone. Buenos dias. It's a pleasure to be here with you all today. I'll just give the instructions very quickly in English and then in Spanish, and then we'll turn on the interpretation. Voy a dar las instrucciones rápidamente para la interpretación y luego lo vamos a activar. So in a moment, when we turn on interpretation, you'll see an icon appear at the bottom of your screen. Please click on that icon and press the English channel if you'd like to listen to English, and the Spanish channel if you'd like to listen to Spanish. Even if you don't need interpretation, it's very important that you choose a channel so that you can hear the audio and that you can hear the interpretation when it's necessary. It's super important if you speak during the event that the language you're speaking and that the channel you are on are the same. And if you do hear interpretation, you'll hear my voice loudly in the foreground and then the original audio very quietly in the background. Y bueno, rápidamente en español, cuando activemos la interpretación, va a aparecer un icono en la parte inferior de su pantalla. Por favor, denle clic a este icono y elijan su canal, ya sea inglés o español. Es importante, incluso si no necesitan interpretación, que elijan un canal para que puedan escuchar el evento. Y es muy importante, si van a compartir algún comentario, que sea congruente a su canal con el idioma que están hablando, y durante la interpretación escucharán mi voz en español más fuerte, con un volumen más fuerte, y el audio original en inglés en el fondo. Muy bien, eso es todo. Ya podemos activar la interpretación.
Thank you very much, Paulina. We are really excited to be with all of you today in this wonderful and such important subject. And we are very excited to be able to offer interpretation into Spanish. So thank you again very much, Paulina. If you will recall what Paulina said, if you are in the off channel, you will be hearing me, or if you are in the English channel as well. Be sure to select a channel. It is important that you select a channel. As part of housekeeping, we would like to encourage everyone to use the chat options, both on Facebook as well as here on Zoom. Use the chat section that says to all, so that both panelists and people who have joined our conversation can actually hear your messages or read your messages. We will be sharing lots of resources during both the conversation as well as after the event. So please do follow the chat. Please note that we are recording the dialogue and we'll share the options, the available recorded dialogue after the event. And also you can find it on the Jazz YouTube channel. We encourage you to tune into Facebook as well. Please do tweet. We're using the hashtags Jazz Dialogues, hashtag Shift the Power in English, and in Spanish, we are using the hashtags Cambiemos el Poder, hashtag COVID-19, hashtag Mujeres, hashtags Transformando un Mundo en Crisis in Spanish. As you've probably noticed as a viewer, you don't have the ability to switch your audio and camera on. During today's dialogue, only the panelists will be visible to the audience. That's why the chat option is so important, to ensure that you are also able to participate. Please have in mind that we have a strict policy and principle against all forms of violence and hate speech. We will delete any negative or hate-inspired comment in the chat box, and the participant will be kicked out from the dialogue and will be blocked from re-entering. In the event, there is a security issue that requires us to end this webinar abruptly. We will immediately email everyone who registered a new Zoom link, and we'll quickly restart the dialogue. So please, in that event, be sure to check your email for a new link. It is now a great pleasure for me to introduce, in case you haven't met her, she's a visionary feminist. She is our jazz executive director, Shireen Essoff.
Thank you, Pumi. And yeah, welcome everybody to the 5th in our dialogue series, Women Radically Transforming a World in Crisis, which is a series that has specifically been created to allow us to come together in conversation at a time when we are all physically distancing, to be able to claim political space to talk about the things that really matter. And today's dialogue is focusing on what elections mean for our movements. I think this is especially important at this time when elections are looming large in the United States and there is so much at stake, but also when we know that there are so many lessons that can be shared in this moment on the experience and approaches to elections from so many regions and countries around the world. And so, yeah, welcome to you all. Welcome to our amazing speakers who are lending their wisdom and experience to this conversation, and really looking forward to a rich dialogue. So thank you for joining us. Back to you, Pumi.
Thank you, Shireen. Gracias, Shireen. Bienvenidas de nuevo aquí. Vamos a
Daisy
ahora.
says, thank you, Shireen. Welcome again. And now we will start the dialogue with music. We're talking about a subject that is very controversial, which is the subject of elections. But we're not only talking about elections. We're talking about what elections have to do, how they're related to movements. And we would like to start by presenting this Cuban-Mexican artist called Layden, and who has prepared a song inspired by the movements of Maria Verde in Latin America, and who is sharing this beautiful song with us, which is the Revolution If We Can't Dance. And now, Layden and her song.
Hola, ¿qué tal, amigas, amigos? ¿Cómo están? Yo soy
Hello, friends. I am Layden.
y les quiero presentar esta canción que compuse.
I would like to share this song with you.
Como música, compositora y mujer, siento una responsabilidad social porque la música es un vehículo para sentir y comunicar. Este video fue realizado por la Asociación Civil Marea Verde y la canción se llama Hasta Salvarnos. Grito tu nombre porque me faltas. Lo nombran las paredes y las estatuas. Vivo en el riesgo, no soy cobarde. Aunque me oculten, aunque me maten. Fuego en la boca, brillo en las manos. Quememos todo hasta salvarnos. Te lo digo de frente, no tengo confusión. Lo escribo en un papel, en las calles o en prisión. Viste el argumento, son otras las maneras, pero niegas si hubo alguna otra forma en que me oyeras. Ingrid, Fátima, Karen, María. Y tú en tu privilegio no te bajas de la silla. Te invito a una pregunta que te ponga a pensar. ¿Eres tan inseguro que tienes que dominar?
Una semilla en cada almerida va creciendo fuerte, siempre combativa. Riégala con ira por tanta mentira, porque mala vibra y la violencia se respira como la ley del hielo, borrando anhelos, celos, cortando vuelos con golpes certeros pa'l suelo. Novias sin velo, ni velas pa'l entierro. No hay duelo, cuerpo perdido en cueros.
Vivo en el riesgo, no soy cobarde. Aunque me oculten, aunque me maten. Fuego en la boca, brillo en las manos. Quememos todo hasta salvarnos. Vivo en el riesgo, no soy cobarde. Aunque me oculten, aunque me maten. Fuego en la boca, brillo en las manos. Quememos todo hasta salvarnos.
Pumi, bienvenida. Pumi estará acompañándonos.
Pumi, welcome. Pumi will be helping us with the moderation of this space. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Daisy. It's such an honor to be surrounded by such amazing women who do such important work around the world. We are very delighted and excited to be in conversation with you all.
Y así es, todas vivimos en los riesgos y en los movimientos.
Just like the song said, we all live in risks and in movements in a world that was already in crisis prior to the crisis currently affecting us now. And that is why we would like to begin this first segment of our dialogue by presenting these amazing women who we will be sharing the dialogue today. And we will begin with Ever Joyce and tell you a bit about Ije, as we know her, as we call her. She's from Zimbabwe and she's actively participated in feminist and social justice movements in Zimbabwe as well as on the African continent. Ever Joyce, a prominent blogger, writer, and an influencer. And she's active, very active in social media. And with her perspective and her experience, she contributes to many print publications and online publications as well. Ever Joyce, to begin, do you think that the elections are moments to use for mobilization and organization as women, and also opportunities for our voices to be heard and to continue mobilization and creating pressure even after the elections take place? But the question is, for you, in other words, are the elections a space where we can really contest power and use women's voices and movements' agendas, or is the risk of being co-opted?
Thank you, Daisy, and thank you, Pumi, for that lovely introduction. It is lovely to be here with all of you to have this really important conversation. So one of the things I think that's important for me to say right up front is I come from a country that is suffering from electoral fatigue. We have had 6 elections and counting in the last 20 years, if you don't count the smaller ones. So some of us are suffering from election fatigue. However, to answer your question, I think let's start with the positive. Yes, indeed, elections are an important small, and I emphasize that, elections are an important small part of the democratic process. They are only a moment in which we as women, as feminists, can choose the leaders that we want, can choose the governance system that we want, can put our issues on the agenda and set the agenda of how we want to be governed and what we expect from those that will be taking up leadership positions. So it is also an important moment for us as women to participate in terms of being part of decision-making processes. So as we have seen all over the world, I think since even way before Beijing, but I think largely after the Beijing conference, when women's political participation was firmly on the agenda, we have seen an increase, and we have seen how women have risen to the challenge, have said, we are here, you used to ignore us, and women have come out in their numbers to participate, whether it's in local government elections and whether it's national government elections, but particularly national government elections in many, many of our countries. So as I said, elections are a very important but small part of democracy and governance processes. And they are a small part, and I keep emphasizing that because for me, what really matters more is what happens before the elections, but much more importantly, what we want to see and what we expect to see as women after an election, right? So when we have put our issues on the agenda, whether it's gender-based violence, whether it's street lighting, whether it's availability of water, whether it's healthcare systems, whatever those issues are, right? We will have put them on the agenda. We use that moment to influence manifestos of political parties. We use those to influence the public conversation, in the period before the elections, particularly the campaigning process. And then afterwards, much more importantly, that's when we should put up the pressure much more, right? To say, this is what you promised. These are the issues that we put on the agenda, and this is what we would now like to see. And so for me, what matters more is then what happens, much more what one would call the outcomes, of any electoral process. And that's, where I feel we haven't put as much effort. I think that's where we tend to lose a lot of, the momentum, because after we've elected people, we expect them to do what we will have asked them to do. And I think rather than continue to keep up the pressure, sometimes we tend to relax. But going back to my earlier point, I think the challenge, is that elections have been reduced to exactly being just one moment. From being one moment, elections are now seen as the be-all and end-all of democracy, right? The outcomes of that process and that system, I think largely are not being questioned, are not being talked about. But I think more importantly, again, going back to my country, which I'm saying suffers from electoral fatigue, you then see that we keep having faith in a system that is so rigged right from the start, a system that is not designed to incorporate the voices, the rights, the interests of women in terms of redistribution of resources and power, in terms of public participation in the democratic process itself, and in terms of the outcomes that we expect to see on a day-to-day basis in our lives.
Thank you so much, Ida. You have just said something that's absolutely fundamental. And to answer this question about whether the elections are a space where we can really contest power and where women can raise their voices, and you just raised the issue of trust and trusting in a system. And now we're going to pass on to Sandra Moran. She is a revolutionary activist lesbian, and she works with sexual diversity in youth and women. She's also a politologist, educator, and she is known in the region as Mujer Tambona, and she has been elected as the first lesbian congresswoman in Guatemala. And after concluding that position, she is now organizing the movement of women with constitutional power to create a new constitution from the perspective of women and with indigenous communities and a diversity of sexual communities. For Sandra, these two positions are necessary to be a decision maker and to be in spaces of discussion. So Sandra, this question is for you. Are the elections a space where we can contest power and where we can have a voice? Thank you so much for inviting me. Thank you for this space. First of all, I think that we have to be able to dispute power in all spaces. So in other words, from the movement, we need to be able to contest power. And we need to be able to do it in different ways and in different contexts and through different actions. In terms of representative democracy, and specifically in terms of elections, it's something that has weakened discussions for us in the movement. There's a line that says that no, that it has not been helpful. Some people say that it has been helpful, and that has weakened us. So yes, I do think it is important to contest power, and I think this space is useful, elections, because that's how laws are established and how we have access sort of to different local results. Now, how do we contest this? I've always participated in social movements, but because I received an invitation from a political party who's open to social movements, I was a candidate and I was elected. I was part of the Congress for 4 years. And I think the experience was very important because today I can speak about what it meant to be there, to have a voice, and to contest power from within. If elections can be part of a strategy, as my sister just spoke and said, if it can be part of a larger strategy, that's very helpful and very important. Then we can build popular power. We can put on the table all the issues that we have, all the problems, and we can make our demands as well as present our proposals. And we are creating movement in terms of candidates that can help us to build that power. However, if it's not part of a larger strategy, it's likely that it will weaken us. However, those who are participating as candidates have the opportunity to amplify the needs and the voices of the movements. In my case, it wasn't part of a movement strategy, but with colleagues from rural communities, an academic colleague, a colleague from myself from the feminist movement and diversity, we were able to amplify voices. We were able to contest and question power and to open spaces for dialogue and discussion and to resolve some problems that we were able to address from a legislative context. So the elections in general can be a space for building popular power. However, we need to solve this disconnect between whether we go or we don't go to elections. If we sometimes we have to support the least bad or the least worst option. But that's not enough to represent our voices and completely change the power dynamic. That's the issue. Are we going to change the power dynamic? And is it really possible to do or not? And there we have to really look closely at our political systems and how institutions that follow up with elections, because those who already have power already have the system controlled in such a way so that ourselves, our feminist vision, our leftist vision can't participate with enough power. So Our final objective is to not be there. It's to transform the lives of women, communities, and diversities. Thank you so much, Sandra, says Daisy. Yes, that's true. Our main goal is to not be in that system, but rather to transform the lives of women. Niken Lastari is a young woman who has developed her leadership and organization skills in the community during more than 14 years. She's currently the executive director of FAM in Indonesia. FAM is the form of young activism in Indonesia. And Niken thinks that elections have a direct and indirect impact on the lives of women. And as Sandra was saying, that is the main goal, to transform women's lives. So if these elections have a direct and indirect impact on women, they play an important role for the movement. So Niken, how is power contested through elections? What is your perspective on this?
Okay, thank you, Daisy. Since election is a constitutional form of democracy to legitimate power, I think it is an important part of women's movement strategy. And then that oftentimes the election result or the process of election itself have direct and indirect impact to women's life and women's movement. So election also happen in village level to national level. So we as activists, we can choose our level of advocacy based on our capacities, because not all activism or all advocacy are in the national level. So the election in village and district level are as important and essential to our grassroots political movement. And we can use election to evaluate how far our community has changed or not changed in terms of our movement of our community organizing work, because our activism has been doing political education and community organizing work to challenge the concept of power and representation. We do this by discussing and analyzing the power within the family, provide support for community members to become leader in village level, become a woman religious leader in community, and to have many leadership role in grassroots level that people can relate, have close contact, and feel direct impact. So with the village law in 2014, many women's organizations, including PEKA and PESADA, have successfully support women to be elected as leader in village consultative body or as head of village. And their role are very important to influence village policies and local budget. And the village election is the closest and important area to change the narrative on power and feminist leadership. So this area is important for grassroots movement. I think that's my
stand. Thank you so much, Niken. I think everything you just said is incredibly important, but especially about the impact that the elections can have on women. Now, we will move on to Gabriela Lemos. Gabriela Lemos is from My Family Votes in the United States and is founder and general director of Revolution Strategy. She is dedicated to promoting voting and working with the Latin American community in the United States. And she also has a doctorate from the University of Miami in political international economy and political theory. Gabriela believes that Latin people in the United States are an absolutely essential group during the election cycle in the same way that Latinas, and Latinx, and 20% of Latina women have suffer violence, which is increasing all the time. The Latin community, and specifically Latin women, according to Gabriela, need to assume this power that has to do with voting and elections. But can power really be contested in elections? The floor is yours, Gabriela.
Gracias a todas las ponentes, me encanta lo que estoy escuchando.
Thank you, and thank you to all the presenters. I love everything that I've been hearing. That's a very, very good question. And something that we've seen when we connect it with movements, at least here in the United States, is that there is a shift when we have a political agenda and an ideological agenda. Part of the problem is that we have two political parties. And it's a little bit difficult to participate within the system. I think Sandra made a very important comment. And she said that within public policy is where decisions are taken place that impact all of us. So the Hispanic community has a problem in terms of identification, identity within the United States. This is a country that looks at the racial system as something binary between Afro-Americans and white Americans. And it's also a very patriarchal system. So Latinas in particular are suffering exponentially in this country. They have the lowest levels of income in the country. They were the first ones who were unemployed as a result of the virus. And yet they are the ones most affected as a result. That's the negative part. But in terms of the positive side, what we see with women is that they're the ones that are most likely to attend university and to move forward. And Latinas are also the ones who are growing small businesses. So there's a combination of situations. The realistic one, what we see day to day, and those of us who join social movements, the feminist movement, or in my case, the progressive movement, I have a very specific idea about the political economy of the for a long time. And I see that there are spaces that need to be improved. And in order to achieve that, we need people who participate in those kinds of activities and think in the same way. But we also see that parties dilute all of that. So it's difficult. There's always tension between the movement, whether it's the feminist movement or the progressive movement, and the political parties, which are much more neoliberal. So are very interested in politics, but they don't vote. They don't go out to vote. When we look at the rates, for some reason, between, or when it comes time to vote,
hacer el voto, ir a las urnas y votar, ahí es donde se ven algunos rompimientos.
Entonces, yes, we see a disconnect in that sense. Daisy says, thank you so much. Thank you, Gabriela. And I think what you're saying is very important. And now we're going to pass on to Hilda Rivera, who is a feminist from Honduras. And at a very young age, she began her path in movements. Hilda has participated in.
de formar articulaciones del movimiento social y popular
She
y
has
feminista.
participated in social, popular, and feminist movements, not only in Honduras, but throughout Mesoamerica. And she is currently the executive coordinator of the Center for Women's Rights. Hilda, what do you think about the discussion? And do you think that power can really be contested in these contexts, in the context like elections? Thank you so much. I value everything that's been said so far. I have more than 40 years experience and participating in the feminist movement as well. And I think it's important to analyze if it's possible to achieve change in a system for women, and if there's space for a feminist agenda. I think there are a few elements we need to keep in mind. The first one, where we find ourselves at that time in the country, and if there are some democratic spaces where we can participate, if there are opportunities, if there are fragmentations, or if we as a movement can include our agendas in those spaces. And there's also something that has to do with ethic and a feminist ethics, because that process of trying to evolve ourselves in electoral politics, there's a risk of being co-opted. There's that risk, and that political ethics, or rather those ethics, can be a problem. And it's connected to what Sandra was saying. And in the context of Honduras, I think there are many risks. And in talking about the context of Honduras, to have a feminist agenda during the next few years, I understand, and I know, and I accept that as long as we live in these weakened democracies that favor transnational interests and economic groups, it would be very important to be able to participate. The experience that we have in Honduras in 2017, we have an electoral system that guarantees us fraud. And success for the president, who was illegally elected. And it has not been possible to change legislation. We have a president so I think there's a high level of risk.
Muchísimas gracias, Hilda.
Thank you so much, Hilda. Daisy says, thank you so much, Hilda. I think you are talking about that's very connected to what EJ was saying, and that is that we are in a very risky situation and that we're working with a system that is not designed for inclusion. Now we're going to move on to Mikun Chanon from Myanmar. She is one of the founders from the Women's Network, and she is in charge of the program for women's empowerment for the women's organization, and she is president of this Women's Network. In 2014, Mikun Chanon was awarded with the Peace Prize in Story Not Told, and Mikun believes that the federal system should move forward, but can power really be contested? Can it really be changed within the system? Can it be changed at the root? What are your thoughts?
So, hello, everybody. I'm glad to be here to also learn from other sisters from other part of the world. And I just feel that why it's so similar to the women movement around the world. And here in Myanmar, that is the third time of the election that we get after we start for the democratization process. So in 2010, 2015, and 2000, now it's 2020. So that is really important. And I really would like to bring back what Joyce Wynn said about the election, that in the democratization process, and then also we have to choose the one that we really believe, that we really want them to bring our rights, I mean, like together with the minority rights, and then also for the women movement. And so in Myanmar, more of us, we are working on the movement, like Vote for Women campaign, and then also for women voices to be heard in the different levels and in different areas. But if we look at to the election result in Myanmar, that in 2010, we can see 3% of the women representative in the parliament. And then lately it's increasing to the 13%. But this time we hope that we can get more women, as we need voices of women in the parliament and to shape the politics and then to work in the political decision-making role. And as well as I'm one of the ethnic women in Myanmar, then when we talk about the movement, we have to go together with the two movements. That one, for the ethnic movement that I said about the federal system, that we have to go towards. And here in Myanmar, together with the election, we also have to face with the peace process. So those discussions, the political discussion from the peace process, and also with the election, and also as I said, the election itself is important, as we need to vote the person who can really represent our identity, and but beyond that, how we can move everything. So in Myanmar, we also discuss about the constitutional change and the federal system. And then also we talking a lot about the women's rights and the movement, and then the law that really protect the women to be exist and to develop here in Myanmar. So this is very important and crucial. And also we hope that all the women candidates can be the representative of the women and the work on the gender equality. But of course, we're not really expecting only for women. We also want male MPs to work together with us. And also the things that when we come to the movement, in the results also came out that the women came to vote is less than men. And in my constituency, the vote, who came for vote is only 42% of the total population came for the vote. And so we really worry that more people to come for vote, and then also more women to come for vote. But because of the pandemic, all the situation has been changed, and so people were worried. And but however, in that situation, we are moving, and we are still pushing to the community for vote for women, and then also the representative from the ethnic political parties and ethnic representative to represent in the parliament in the future for building of Myanmar.
Gracias. Muchísimas gracias. Vamos a seguir profundizando en este tema.
Says, thank you so much, and we will continue to go into more detail in the subject and in the role of women. Now we'll go on to South Africa, and we will hear from Shuki Sawai, or Suki, as we call her, who is a thinker and an organizer, feminist thinker and organizer, Pan-African organizer who has collaborated and continues to collaborate in various movements as well as in community actions in order to address inequality in education, gender, sexuality, and justice in terms of territory and race. So for Suki, the question is, we can consider that democracies don't start and end with a vote. The vote at most has given us superficial changes. So can you tell us a bit more about these electoral process? Can the elections really create change? And is that where we can contest power, or do they only co-opt movements?
Thank you so much to Jazz for having us, and to the incredible women that I'm sharing the panel with. I'm very delighted to be here. Yes, so I know I have 3 minutes, so excuse me if I refer back to my notes. I just want to make sure that I'm within the time frame. So I begin with the premise that our visions and demands as Indigenous and Native peoples who exist as women, who exist as poor and working class, who exist as lesbians and trans, and any other variation of unfreedoms, etc. Our visions for ourselves and our communities are far bigger and so much more urgent than what big men in parliaments can deliver for us. And even as we engage and organize, I think we need to be absolutely honest about how far the value and benefits of elections can take us. As I have argued, democracy does not end and begin at voting, right? Democracy instead must give effect to and ultimately mean shared and collective power to the people. So our relationship with elections must include then a commitment to making this shared and collective power real and meaningful. For my own context in Azania, South Africa, it means that we can't speak about these visions and these dreams outside of a commitment in our organizing to land justice or land return, to socialism, and there are certain non-negotiables there. I also then want to argue that only a people in their power can make choices, right? If we want to argue that, elections give us an opportunity to make choices, only people in their power can make choices. And when you are living under domination, you are engaged in struggle to negotiate for that power. So elections become, for me, a site of negotiation. And as activists, organizers, and community members, we are organizing for power, right? And therefore, we are fighting to win. And so because we are fighting to win, ours must be about, and this is what I am consistently questioning, and even in my own work, building community resilience in the spaces we wish to organize and wish to influence, so that our people can rely less on mechanisms that have been endorsed in the first instance by the very states that form part of this global Western imperialist power setup, which keeps us in this constant state of negotiation, frustration, and limiting our visions for a shared, collective, liberated future. So I'm arguing that ours is to move away from this idea that only cosmetic changes, which is what elections deliver for us, are only ever possible, but rather building collective and communal resilience and capacity for evolution. This is why we organize. This is how we get to these fuller freedoms. So elections become part of a part of our strategies, insofar as we are able to use them to find our way out of the current global Western imperial setup, which keeps us perpetually under conditions of this negotiation that I'm speaking about, right? So as a feminist agenda, I'm closing right now.
Okay,
so a feminist agenda, which is liberatory and abolitionist, must say that we don't want the rule of the father. The rule of the father and governments being institutions of fatherhood in a way, means that we want to get to a point where our communities are resilient and our communities are able to build for power according to the desires of how we imagine what a different future can look like. Thank you so much.
Muchas gracias, Suki. Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you so much, Suki. Thank you so much for this question and for these comments. I think your reflection is profound. And it talks to us about going beyond cosmetic changes. And here we will present Jessica Berta. She is a Black feminist and queer. And in 2015, she founded a three-point strategy in order to provide a space focused on transformational racial justice instead of transactional justice. And this is another example of going beyond the cosmetics. And it focuses on elections in the United States, and she is part of the African American Convention, and she's also committed with elections as a tactic to build power in public policy. And when we'll move on now to Jessica, we would like to hear from you if you think elections are an opportunity or if they're a source of co-option. And as Suki said, what can we do with these elections?
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to be a part of the conversation, and I have a notebook full of your notes. And so thank you for all of the brilliance here today. My name is Jessica Bird, and I am a part of the Movement for Black Lives here in the United States. And I'm one of the leaders of what we call the Electoral Justice Project. And you know, what I will say specifically about elections is I've been working on elections for the last 15 years. And, you know, part of the last 5 years of the Movement for Black Lives that really came out of a couple of years of sustained protests of young, queer, working class Black people in the United States around police murders of Michael Brown, police murders of Sandra Bland, as well as white vigilante murders like Trayvon Martin. And part of this iteration of Black movement in the United States has really named that electoral capture or the centering of a candidate is of no interest and to the liberatory values that we hold. But the election of Donald Trump really asked us as protesters and as activists a really important question, which is, if we are in defense of Black lives, if our vision and mission is to uplift and invest in Black people in the United States and set forth a vision for Black people outside of policing, outside of incarceration and jails and cages, then what is our responsibility to defend Black people from a white nationalist president and a white nationalist political formations that have been gaining traction over the last decade? And so we took that big question very seriously. Every iteration of Black movement in the United States has answered this question. And so we know it's not new, that our elders and leaders have also answered this question in the 70s. Should happen. Which one would support more freedom, more equality, more civil rights for Black people in the United States? Well, 40 years later, our largest question is, if white nationalism is gaining traction in our political parties, then what is our role in that? And so we've responded by saying our role is to tell the truth. our role is to hold two truths at once, or a politic of multiple truths. And the multiple truth is that elections are just a tactic, as has been said here many times, and I agree with, and that we have a very clear opposition and opponent inside the United States that is working to create an authoritarian white nationalist political power that is pushing back against social movements like the movement for Black Lives, like the women's and feminist movement, like the queer liberation movement in the United States, and that we have a role and a responsibility in protecting our people from that threat.
Muchísimas gracias, Jessica. Se nos ha acabado el tiempo, pero vamos a continuar.
Thank you so much, Jessica. We're out of time, but we will continue.
Introduce un poco lo que vamos a hablar en nuestro próximo segmento. Esto no es nuevo en realidad, y como esto no es nuevo, tenemos que caminar hacia los aprendizajes.
This is not new. So now we will go on to Pumi.
Thank you very much, everybody, for your wonderful contributions. I mean, if there's one thing that comes out is this ever-going contradictions that we hold. Jessica calls them multiple truths of what does it mean to take political power? What does it mean to fight for the quotas? What does it mean? At what cost is, at what cost do we do that in relation to building our movements? Zuki speaks about we need to build the community resilience. Until when? When do we build that power? When do we take that? So I want to invite everyone in this moment. I understand there's a beautiful chat going on amongst all of my wonderful sisters here. But I want to invite you to concentrate on when we have engaged with elections and when we have thought about pushing women, pushing trans, pushing migrants to take public office, what have been the disappointments? What have been the gains? What have we been able to advance? And what is it that we have lost? At what cost? So I'll do it the other way around. I'll start with Mikung Changnon this time.
So thank you. The women to get involved in the politics is like we need a kind of really law that can guarantee that women get involved in the politics and in the decision making. So that is the policy, the gender policy that need to be made. And also, if you look at our constitution, that really block the women, the rights of the women itself in the constitution. And also, after we got the policy, then we have to make the action plan. And all of if we look at the gain that we have, now we have more women to be prepare for the election. That came out from the movement that we have been pushing and advocating to the government and the different stakeholders that to include more women. So that however, there is the 30% quota is really like, if it is compared to other part of the world, then they're really small number. But here, we cannot reach those 30% quota yet here in Myanmar. And then also when it's come to the women, that is the law that really not really protected. And the women candidate now, they like in the social media, when they prepare, the social norms and the culture that we have here in Myanmar is so strong. And then so they really blame, then they said that the women are rubbish. And then so that's, they really bring out the commitment of the women to come into the election. So we have to work on that, about those challenges. As most of the people who blame for is like another counterpart. It's not, but of course there are some women as well. The election is important to prove and to show that our movement to come forward. And I believe that after the movement, then those women representatives can also represent the whites of the women and the people from the crowd.
Thank you, Mikun. Thank you. Sandra, you took public office on a mandate from the movement, right? You went there. What is it that the movement gained? What were the disappointments, and what were you able to advance? And some of the harsh critiques that come from the very movement that push people sometimes. Your reflections.
Muchas gracias.
Sandra says, thank you so much. So first of all, being part of the Congress it's a 4-year term. And it's a system that has been in place for centuries, and a country, you know, republic for 200 years, and it's a system that is co-opted, and we have to be very clear about that. So when I was elected, in my group, we were a small group, there were 3 of us out of 158, we decided that we were going to represent the voice of everything we've done and everything we've asked for and protested against. And I think that's what we achieved. We were able to amplify the voices of the movement. We were able to strengthen the relationship with communities and visibilize many problems. And we were able to solve some concrete problems in terms of health and education. And we were also had success in terms of information, because information is power. And movements don't necessarily have the ability to access information. So we in Congress had access to information, and we were able to share that information with movements so that the work we were doing was much more focused and with greater knowledge. In the Congress, being able to speak directly with ministers was important, and we played the role of intermediaries so that ministers could listen directly to the communities. And sometimes simple things are not valued. But however, I do want to say that it was very meaningful that for many communities that I showed up there as a member of government, because it represents a power building, because communities are usually not heard or listened to. And when members of government arrive, as one of my colleagues in France was saying, well, she said that she's a representative of the government, but she arrived by car, and usually someone from government arrives in a helicopter. So it was important for us to change that perception, change that idea of who forms part of government. I was very, very, very criticized. And of course, there was criticism about why I didn't do so much. But I think that idea that in 4 years we're going to transform everything, I think that's not realistic. I think we need to make the most of the moments we have, the opportunities we have, and the spaces we have. And it's important to be clear that being in that space is a clear contestation of power, because what they're going to try and do is for you to fail. Because if you're successful in government, then you become a reference, an example. So they're going to try as hard as they can for you to fail, so that people can say, see, you didn't achieve anything. Why did you go into government? So that is something we need to build and fight against, so that we can recognize that those spaces are necessary, but it's not the only space to move forward in our movements. We need to combine. We would say 3 inside and 1,000 on the outside.
It's not cosmetic. Here's the challenge. It's not cosmetic. What's happening in Azania that is causing this approach of the cosmetic? Is there something in your organizing work that has disappointed you, but that you want to take in giving that depth for
Great. Thanks, Tony. What's happening in Azania is a very critical question. But to speak more directly, I think I'm always interested in how we make a sort of collective agenda possible, right? So what becomes the agenda of, African women in Tanzania, right? What are our visions for a different or alternative future? My frustration for me, and this is to speak to your question, I think that there's ways in which, you know, global white hegemonic power literally plays such a huge role in taking away, you know, our capacities to imagine. I don't think as comrades and organizers and activists, we move from a genuine premise that a different future is possible, that we will be able to realize conditions through ongoing activism and organizing where we do not live under the bondage of capitalism, of imperialism, and so forth. So the agenda for me, Pums, as feminist organizing in Africa and as feminist organizing in everywhere where we are under essential occupation, is to say, how do we make possible the idea of, while we might have different strategies, right, and meaning goals, we do not compromise on that vision. So if, for instance, for me, in a different context, even on the continent, as well as outside of the continent, elections present you know, different opportunities and are more urgent as a strategy than other places, for instance. Do we have, or are we working towards some sort of a collective vision? Whereas, however we participate with the electoral process, we are understanding that it is towards mobilizing, organizing, and agitating for what I'm insisting is a possibility of this different future. What capitalism and this global hegemony robs us of, and I'm insisting on this point, is like, we can't imagine, for instance, as Black people anyway, that our relationship with the state, that police will always need police, right? We'll always have violence in our communities, we'll always. And so when I say building that community resilience, to borrow from Jessica, is to say there is a limit to how we can mobilize around one person or one idea. And there's also a limit, Pumi, in how we can keep arguing that gangani, as long as, you know, we need an agenda.
Thank you, Zooks. Gilda, and please speak loudly so that they are struggling with your audio. Now, what is the feminist ethic you spoke about? Given all of this, what would a feminist ethic in building our movements and engaging with elections look like? What are the strategies so that we move away from being disappointed, but we really win?
Yo creo que un gran factor que hay que tomar en cuenta es,
I think that an important element that we should have in mind
en cualquier propuesta que deseamos colocar, los intereses, la
is
necesidad.
how do we include women's needs in our proposals? And I'm referring to fundamental rights. For example, the right to a life free of violence, sexual and reproductive rights, and their right to decide, take decisions about their bodies and their lives.
Algunas de estas demandas en una agenda política han sido bastante.
And we have been disillusioned when we have tried to include these needs in political policy.
Para los cargos de elección popular. Y hemos venido bregando en esas luchas, en esos escenarios. Y hay muchísimas enseñanzas. Yo pensaba...
There are so many things that we have learned.
No quiero caer en una posición maniqueísta que es blanco y negro. Creo que hay avances, pequeños
avances. I think we have had some small successes, but we've faced a lot of obstacles. From disqualification, crime issues, all the political limitations that members of their political party put on them. And I spoke with Asiapa Martinez, a feminist from Honduras, who is very interested in the political participation of women. And I asked her what she thinks, and she said it's a very difficult context. At one point, she tried to be a candidate.
Partido de supuesta izquierda,
and at that time, a supposedly left-wing party
que son oportunidades para el debate.
Yeah.
Con algunas mujeres diputadas, pero hay que reconocer que hay muchas mujeres.
We have to recognize that there are many women who are interested in participating. And sometimes these women go against the agenda of the movement. These are the traps that we are facing. And feminist ethics has to do with including our values.
It's not to forget the ethic throughout our organizing processes, not just to dump it when we get into, the system. Thank you so much, Gilda, for that. Niken, where I live, we get blamed for how much energies we put into democracy, into the elections, in 1994 in South Africa. My love for FEM and how you organize, I'm wondering what you are thinking about, the disconnect in relation generational and the energies that young people are putting in relation to engaging with elections in particular.
Okay, so based on our experience is that many grassroots organizations learn hard lesson on navigating power during election because many women activists were recruited by political party as vote getter and to influence public opinion that the party has fulfilled 30% quota and that the party has women perspectives, which sometimes not true. So I think in this moment, and then a woman, especially the young woman, are trying to challenge the notion of leadership, because I think it is important to note that women's movement have opened up many venues for women community members and including young women to become leaders and to be part of decision-making process. And a feminist movement also challenged mainstream leadership concept as structural, individual, and masculine. I think our movement see leadership as collective, grounded, and transformative work. So it is where young women trying to influence the movement. And I think talking about the hardship of the election is that I remember in 2009 election, this is my learning based in my stay in Pesada in North Sumatra, where we campaign for women vote for women. And despite the large number of beneficiary communities, most of women candidates defeated in the area where women's NGOs were working. And so although women community members said they will choose women, but based on the calculation, it didn't happen. And it was shock for us. But then it is a reflection for us, because when women go back to their home, it's not easy to keep their votes, because based on our reflection, women still bound and pressed to vote candidates from their own clan or family system. They were offered money and that happened. So I mean, this is to also reflecting from my sister in Myanmar, where they will have this woman vote for woman campaign. Sometimes the result is not what you expected. and this is what we have experienced. And also during the 2019 national election in Indonesia, there were huge divide and hatred among communities due to ethnic and religious identity played by politicians to gain votes. And I think this also might happen in many countries, including Myanmar. And after the election,
Thanks, Niken. I want to move to Gabrielle exactly on that point of organizing minorities and you know some of the tensions around especially identities in taking public office. And Niken and them try to occupy, like you, local seats where you think like you can, you know, have more power. What's your reflection about disappointments and what we can actually learn going forward?
Hay mucho que decepciona, desafortunadamente, en estos instantes.
There's a lot to
Tenemos
say.
una situación política bastante...
Currently, the political situation is very aggressive.
Tanto a favor ni de los afroamericanos, como acaban
And
de
it's a situation that disfavors African Americans and the Hispanic community, specifically Hispanic women. Multiculturalism in the United States is incredibly important, but
entre el sistema que existe en este instante,
there are some deep divides between the current system, President Trump, and his administration and people that support him, and the impact it's having in our communities. This is not a normal time. I don't know if normal is the word, because what is normal, but it's abnormal in the sense that we're seeing a fracture. Instead of moving forward, we're pretty much going backwards. We're seeing increase in violence against women in many spaces.
También, pues, una autoridad más que está más basada en lo que son las agencias policíacas, tanto a nivel local.
We're also seeing an expression of authority that's based on police forces and local, national, federal level. So, for example, if we're talking about counties, for example, and sheriffs, men represent 30% of the population, but 90% of the sheriffs. And why is that important? Because they're imposing processes that aren't necessarily legal. So that has a negative impact on women and people of color, as we say it here, because they don't accept us. The tension is very strong. There's a lot of tension between the social changes taking place and what we're asking for as well, Jessica, and the Black Lives Movement, which is so, so important, which has taken us to another level. Thank you to Jessica and her colleagues, but it also requires, because here in the United States, the right to vote is not constitutional. I don't know if that makes sense or if I'm explaining myself in the sense that it's not part of the Constitution, and that's something to have in mind. The structures don't work for us, so we have to make decisions and look for alternatives. So this process is even more important, and there have been a lot of changes since the 1970s, but now the reaction is to move them back.
Pues ha cambiado y no la quieren aceptar.
And they don't want to accept that.
Así soy, disculpa. Thank you so much, Gabriela. I'm going to ask Daisy to take us to the next segment where we will engage. I didn't skip you, you know, by accident. because we do want to center what you are saying. Yesterday, Frontline was launched, but what does it mean really for everyone inside the US and everyone outside of the US? So I'll hand over to Daisy right now to take us forward. Thank you everyone for all your answers, and please keep engaging with the chat.
Así es, muchísimas gracias por todo el involucramiento que están teniendo en el
Thank
chat.
you so much. Thank you all for participating. The chat is so full of amazing and interesting questions. Some of the questions in the chat have already been answered by the panelists. What are the impact that the elections in the United States have, specifically to what Suki was saying, these co-opted systems, this global white power, which is a corporate power, I would add, which is getting stronger and stronger. We're going to start with Ever Joyce to talk about the impact of the elections in the United States in our contexts.
That's a very difficult question, Daisy.
Yes, en serio, sí.
I think that's really so, so difficult, for a number of reasons. Many of us, ordinary people, ordinary citizens in our own countries, but also our governments, they see what happens in the US, good or bad, right? And the US having set itself up, or having been set up, let me say, as kind of the world's head prefect, right? So whether it's on human rights, whether it's on women's rights, whether it's on any minorities' rights, they are always the first ones to comment on what happens everywhere else, right? The US Embassy is always the first one, right? With the statement in any of our countries when certain things happen. And so, we have then this dilemma that this country that sets itself up in that way and plays this role of the head prefect, as I am calling it, it struggles with the very same things that we are all struggling with, right? And I think many of us, going back to 2016 when Trump was first elected, I think many of us on the left progressive front, let me put it that way, we're shocked. We're disappointed in what's happened to American people, right? But interestingly, and this is important for us to note, right? In some of our countries in the global South, there are people, quite a sizable number of people, let me put it this way, who actually celebrated, Donald Trump's winning and his rise to power. And one of them is a very simple reason, and I'll put it simplistically, which is about, the idea was that since he's rich, he's not going to steal, right? And so, and then of course there was the connection with the Christian right, which, as you know, in many of our countries is really gaining ground, is co-opting a lot of middle classes, a lot of leadership in civil society, right? And so you have quite a lot of support, if you like, for Trump and Trumpism as a thing. And so that's what we're looking at now in 2020 to say, those of us on the left, are we going to see a replay? Particularly in this moment, for many of us, Black, brown people in particular, where, we saw the sea rise, if you like, of emotion, of power, of organizing people coming together, around Black Lives Matter, right? So it felt like something had broken. It felt like we are on a path to some change, and I don't want to exaggerate it. So I'm kind of putting those little riders in, to some change. Something broke, something positive. Feel and so it is not just Black people organizing in the States. I think we've seen, this embracing of Black people in the US by Black and brown people all over the world, right? And so we're kind of rooting for you and holding, thumbs for you, and we're like, keep going, we're here. So for many of us, I think a win for Trump again will feel like such a slap in the face.
Muchas gracias.
So much pain, will be so much pain, for many of us in ways I cannot even begin to describe in a year that has been so heavy, a year that has been so difficult, a year in which we have lost, again, a lot of Black icons, right? In the United States as well as globally, right? But particularly in the United States, and somebody wrote the other day and said, it seems like all our heroes are dying. How come they don't seem to die on the other side? So it's been a heavy year, and so people want good news. Everybody's desperate for something good. And so, without going into sort of the bigger, geopolitical, global economic ramifications, I think at a symbolic level, at an emotional level, for many of us, a trumping of Trump at the ballot box this year will be like, finally, something positive has happened this side of 2020, right? Because we need something positive in the world. And the US election is not a US election. It's a global election, right? We all participate in it because of what it means on so many levels. But like I said, particularly in 2020, in the context of everything that's been happening around us. And so
gracias, EJ.
It will mean so much for many of us. No pressure on all of you, but know that we are holding you up, and we are, we're looking to all of you to that's the good news.
Gracias, EJ. Creo que has introducido, por supuesto, tenemos buenas noticias.
Thank you so much, EJ. Our organization and the fact that we are working together as communities, and these dialogues are an example of good news as well. And we know because the elections in the US impact the whole global south. We wanted to ask Jessica, what do you think in terms of US elections, and what can activists learn from the United States and the activists and movements? What can be learned from all of this?
Yes. So there are a couple of things that, and thank you, Everjoyce. I have so much to say. I'm excited to talk to you at some point. A couple of things is we actually want you all to intervene in our elections. The way that you talked about that we do in others. I was the deputy campaign manager for Stacey Abrams in Georgia, who ran for governor, whose election was stolen, and it was a really traumatic experience. And I use that term intentionally, knowing that the election was stolen from us, that we had done all of the work. I actually said on election night, where are other democracies? Where are other people who are coming to say that this was unfair? Like, I believe that the global solidarity that the Movement for Black Lives is building with Pumi, with so many people around the world, is a part of us saying we also need that level of support. We don't believe in the imperialist and the colonialist histories, but we also do want to be in solidarity so that we can talk about the truth of what's happening here. And the truth is that if Donald Trump is not ousted in November, it will be only because it was stolen and nothing else. We have more than enough people. And so if you feel disappointment in the individuals, that is not a correct analysis of what is happening in the United States. There is a specific rigged system, even insofar as our post office has been rigged for our mail to be weeks and weeks and weeks late in an individual problem. It is truly a structural one. And I want to say clearly here, because I don't want to waver, we have to engage in elections in the United States. We have to. But what we also have to do is we will dismantle the Electoral College in my lifetime. We will dismantle the two-party systems and invite in a multi-party process that engages in ideas and not candidates. We will do that. We will engage in the ballot process as initiatives that will help us to free our people from prisons and close jails. And we are doing that right now. We have this year, we have closed multiple private prisons through the use of ballot initiatives. We have ended the war on poor people who are being held in jail for $50 fines through ending cash bail, which we will make a national 100-day agenda. Amendment 4 is a ballot initiative from Florida that voters overwhelmingly voted for, that said that people who were formerly incarcerated should have the automatic right to vote in Florida. And the governor of Florida, who won by 1% of the vote, forced every single person to pay their fines and fees from their time in jail first, totally wiping out the voters' will, the will of the people. And so I want to say to you all clearly that the North Star of the movement for Black Lives is governance. And it's co-governance with movement, where movement is setting the terms of the debate, not politicians. And so we will engage in elections, but please know that we have the power of the people. The movement for Black Lives ushered in the largest social movement in the history of the United States this summer. 26 million people took to the streets. Only 30% of the US population voted for Donald Trump in 2016. Over 3 million people voted for the Democratic candidate Hillary Clinton. In 2018, we know for sure that Stacey Abrams won that election and that Brian Kemp, her opponent, was the Secretary of State counting the ballots and now the governor. There is a massive election rigging, and I implore you not to look to the individuals, but to see our social movements as the canary in the coal mine, begging people to know that we know that our election is rigged. We know that we have not achieved a democratic society yet. We have not. We are still very much inside of a Reconstruction era where Black people's citizenship is in question. It is in question right now. And Black movement is doing everything possible to answer that question, to say who we are and what is required for our governance here. And our participation in elections is not a concession on that truth. We are abolitionists that believe that Black people should not, that all people should not be in cages. We believe that capitalism is one of the greatest barriers of our full and civic participation. And we believe that Black queer feminism is a politic that invites us into the expansiveness of our lives. And voting, it does not concede any of that. But what it does is it allows us to move toward our fullness of that truth. And so we ask us, when you say, and I'll close here, what can you as activists learn from other movement activists in other parts of the United States? We want to know how you dismantled your two-party system if you had one. We want to know how you invite in democratic ideas and how you debate. We want to know how to be in principled debate, not inside of a binary, but inside of an ideas. And we want to de-center candidates, move candidates from the center of our political debates and allow our leadership to truly be people who share our values. So we want your support, your help. We need your prayers. Black people in the United States are truly suffering right now. And I don't say that as hyperbole. We are suffering. We are truly suffering, and we are fighting for our lives. And we ask you to witness us in that. We know that our country has a very specific history and role in this world, and we are working every day to save our own lives and to participate on the global scale at the place that we believe that we deserve and want to be with you all. us in our fullness and in our seeking our own liberation. And I feel so much solidarity with all of you and have loved hearing everything you've said today.
Muchas gracias, Jessica. La verdad es que tal como las personas
Thank you
negras
so much, Jessica.
las personas de color en el sur global también caminamos al filo del
We all are walking together and we're all fighting against the system that oppresses us. So now, Pumi, it's time to close. There's so much going on in the chat. I feel like we needed a whole other hour for this debate to keep it all talking together.
Richness. I mean, Sis EJ was saying at some point, we spend so much time in technicalities around the elections instead of putting our energies to really what matters. And all of you have presented us with really what matters, what it matters to build from below, what it matters, what it means to take public office, what it means to transform systems that purport to create democracy, but actually exclude. You are saying we are more than 50%. We may ask for 30%, but our aim is to get 50 plus as women of all orientations. And so much richness in the chats, in the dialogues. I don't know, Daisy, how we take this from here.
Creo que lo que tenemos que hacer es...
So Daisy says, I think we need to embrace all the questions so that we can bring these voices together and take them back to our own spaces, movements, to welcome these questions, these comments, for example, questions about what kind of life and government systems we need and want as feminists. How can the system be adapted, or how can feminist power be achieved in some way? How can the communities, or how can power be built from within communities? So to welcome these questions that we all have, that the beautiful panelists have made, and that everyone who's participating in the chat has shared. I think it's important to sort of welcome, embrace, make space for these questions. And to know that we want to go beyond cosmetic changes. We want to build a better world for all of us.
Thank you very much, everyone. And I do invite everyone, before Daisy salutes us out, to shift your desks and make space for some movements. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. Daisy.
Muchas gracias a todas por habernos acompañado.
Thank you so much to all of you for joining us. This is the 5th dialogue of women radically transforming a world in crisis. We invite you to visit the previous dialogues. They've been recorded and they are available on our social media. And we also invite you to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And we look forward to being in touch. And also there's another dialogue coming up with a very important subject. And we invite you to join us again and participate in these global dialogues, which is a space of hope for us in this time of crisis. Until the next dialogue, and all of our solidarity for the elections that are coming up in the United States and in the rest of the world.
Jerusalema ikhaya lami ilondoloze